He showed up to her mother's retirement party with another woman on his arm, a bottle of Okanagan wine in his hand, and a smile so practiced it could have been ironed on. He introduced her as a colleague. He said it the way men say things they believe will never be questioned. Casually, lightly, with the particular confidence of someone who has never once been called to account for anything. What he did not know, what no one in that garden knew except Eleanor Hartwell's mother and Eleanor Hartwell's lawyer, was that the retirement party was not simply a retirement party. It was the last gathering before the transfer, the last event before the papers were signed, the trust restructured, and the architecture that had been quietly constructed over 18 months was sealed permanently against him. Adrian Voss believed he was watching his wife's family celebrate an ending. He had no idea he was standing at the beginning of his own. Chapter 1. The Daughter. Nobody counted Eleanor Hartwell was pleasant. Most people, upon meeting her, remembered her as pleasant before they remembered her at all. She was not the kind of woman who announced herself. She did not fill rooms. She did not have a laugh that carried. She wore her dark hair, pulled back in a low knot on weekday mornings, and left it down on weekends in a way that was less style and more default. She drove a Subaru Outback with a crack in the rear bumper that she kept meaning to get fixed. She wore good boots and practical coats, and the same pearl earrings her mother had given her at 25. And if you passed her in the cereal aisle at Loblaws, you would not look twice. This was, she understood by the time she was 30, a form of camouflage so complete it had become structural. Eleanor's mother, June Hartwell, had spent 37 years building Hartwell Remediation Group, a mid-size environmental consulting firm headquartered in Guelph, Ontario, that specialized in contaminated land assessment and industrial site reclamation. It was not glamorous work. It was not the kind of work that made magazine covers or fundraising galas. It was the kind of work that required decades of methodical, unglamorous expertise. And June had built it from a single contract in 1987 into a firm with offices in 4 provinces and contracts with 3 federal ministries. The firm was, by the time of June's retirement, worth approximately $220 million. June had never discussed this publicly. She drove a Buick. She had lived in the same house in Guelph for 30 years. She donated quietly to a Cree language preservation initiative in northern Ontario and a food security organization in Hamilton. And she did not appear on donor walls or charity gala programs, because she believed, with the conviction of a woman who had built something real, that visibility was a vulnerability. She had raised Eleanor on this principle before Eleanor had the language for it. Eleanor knew the shape of the firm. She knew its value. She understood, in the practical and architectural sense, what she stood to inherit. What she had not known until she was in her mid-30s was how important it would be that the wrong people never knew. She learned this through Adrian Voss. Chapter 2. The husband, Adrian Voss, was 44 and wore his competence the way some men wear expensive cologne, pervasively without being asked, in quantities that suggested insecurity dressed as confidence. He was a project manager at a commercial development company in Hamilton, good-looking in a way that required the right lighting, the kind of man who could dominate a conversation about wine or municipal zoning with equal authority and roughly equal depth. He had a firm handshake and an exit strategy in every room. He remembered names when it was useful. He forgot them when it wasn't. He met Eleanor at a conference in Waterloo, where she was representing the Hartwell firm, and he was there for reasons she later realized had more to do with prospecting than professional development. He mistook her quietness for openness. He mistook her listening for agreement. He spent the first year of their relationship believing he was the engine of the partnership, because she had never done anything to convince him otherwise. They married after 2 years. Small ceremony. Niagara-on-the-Lake in October. June attended and said nothing that was not kind, which Eleanor would later understand as its own kind of warning. Her mother had made a career out of saying everything important without saying it directly. The marriage settled within its first winter. Eleanor managed the home, not because Adrian asked, but because the alternative was watching things fall apart, and Eleanor could not watch things fall apart. She paid the mortgage from her salary, a consulting position at an engineering firm, modest but stable. She handled the insurance renewals, the car maintenance bookings, the RSP contributions, the grocery orders that arrived every Thursday. She coordinated the social calendar, booked the flights for their one trip a year, wrote the birthday messages to his parents that he signed with his name. Adrian contributed a paycheck, a presence, and a running commentary on how things could be done better. He had no idea how anything was done at all. By their third year, Eleanor had stopped expecting reciprocity and started cataloging absence. Not bitterly, observationally, the way her mother had taught her to observe everything, with patience and a notepad and the understanding that data accumulates into clarity. And clarity is the only currency that actually protects you. June visited every 6 weeks. She drove herself from Guelph, arrived with a bag of clementines, and sat in Eleanor's kitchen, asking careful questions about how things were going, in the tone of a woman gathering information without appearing to gather information. She did not like Adrian. Eleanor had known this from the first handshake, from the careful way her mother phrased compliments that were not quite compliments. But June Hartwell had not built a $200 million firm by saying things before the evidence supported them. One afternoon, in November, 2 years into the marriage, June arrived while Adrian was at the office. She sat at the kitchen table and drank her tea, and after a long pause, said something Eleanor would carry for the rest of her life. A man who never asks what you carry will always assume he can take, and the men who never ask are not incurious. They already believe the answer is yes. Eleanor looked at her mother. June was watching the window. He will not leave quietly when he decides to go. He will try to take something. Make sure there is nothing for him to take. Eleanor did not ask what her mother meant. She filed it. She continued watching. 14 months later, the watching paid off. Chapter 3. What the credit card said. Eleanor found the first evidence in March, on a weeknight, while reconciling their joint account on her laptop at the kitchen table. Adrian was in the basement watching something on the television. The receipt was from a restaurant in Burlington. A Tuesday, dinner for $280. On a night he had told her he was catching up on work. She looked at the charge for 11 seconds. She closed the laptop. She made herself a cup of tea. She went to bed. She did not sleep. What she did not do was confront him. Eleanor Hartwell had grown up watching her mother operate across negotiating tables with contaminated landowners and federal regulators and insurance adjusters who wanted to pay nothing. She had absorbed, without realizing she was absorbing it, the understanding that the moment you reveal what you know, you lose the advantage of knowing it. She waited. Over the next 2 months, she assembled a file with the same methodical attention she brought to everything. More restaurant charges. A hotel in the Muskokas on a weekend he'd called a guy's fishing trip. A boutique jewelry purchase on Ossington. She began paying closer attention to his phone, not obsessively, but with the quiet, calibrated awareness of a woman who has decided to understand exactly what she is dealing with before she does anything about it. Her name was Simone Aubert, 31 years old. She worked in business development at a real estate tech company in downtown Toronto. She was the kind of beautiful that existed in the same category as Adrian's ambition. Conspicuous, purposeful, designed to be noticed. The relationship had been running for approximately 5 months when Eleanor confirmed it. What she did not know yet was what Adrian had been telling Simone about his wife. She learned that from a screenshot forwarded by a mutual acquaintance who had seen something she shouldn't have seen at a dinner party. The message was from Adrian to Simone, dated 4 months prior. It described Eleanor as quiet and easy. The message said June's money would eventually land with Eleanor, and that the position would sort itself out within 2 years, that he was patient, that Simone should be patient too. Eleanor read the message once. She set her phone face down on the table. She breathed through her nose for a slow count of 8. Then she called her mother. Chapter 4. June Hartwell's architecture. June listened without interrupting. When Eleanor finished, there was a silence of approximately 4 seconds. "I know," her mother said. "How long?" "My security consultant flagged some anomalies about 2 months ago. I had him followed." Eleanor closed her eyes. "I should have told you sooner, but you needed to arrive here yourself. If I had said it first, some part of you would have defended him. Now you have the documents in your own hands and you know what you know. What do I do? Nothing obvious. You do not change your behavior. You do not confront. You keep the house running the way you always have, and you call Robert Tran's office. First thing Monday." Robert Tran was the lawyer who had handled Hartwell Remediation Group's corporate restructuring for 11 years. He was 57, precise in the way of people who have spent decades seeing exactly how badly things go when documents are imprecise, and he had known Eleanor since she was a teenager. Why Robert? Because what comes next is not about Adrian. What comes next is about making sure that by the time he understands the shape of what he married, It is too late to touch any of it. June paused. He is already asking questions, Eleanor. Not of me, of my bookkeeper. Casually. He mentioned the firm at a family dinner and used the phrase future assets twice. He is doing the calculation. We need to finish our architecture before he files his. He is planning to leave? Not yet. He is planning to position. There is a difference. He wants to be leaving from a place of leverage. Eleanor thought about the restaurant in Burlington, the hotel in Muskoka, the jewelry on Ossington, the message to Simone with the word patient underlined by implication in every sentence. He thinks he has time, Eleanor said. Yes, said June. He thinks he has time. Over the next 16 months, June Hartwell and Robert Tran built a structure around Eleanor's future with the same methodical patience June had applied to every complex environmental reclamation project in her career. Slow, thorough, unglamorous, and permanent. The trust was restructured. Corporate holdings were migrated through a series of family trust vehicles that had no connection to Eleanor's marital assets. The consulting salary Eleanor earned remained in a joint adjacent account that Adrian could see, but the real architecture was layered beneath it, in instruments he could not access and did not know existed. Robert documented everything Adrian did that touched any financial perimeter of the Hartwell estate. Every casual question to staff, every valuation search conducted from his own devices, every inquiry routed through a real estate colleague about the assessed value of the Guelph property. Adrian was building a case. He simply did not know that the case was being built against him by people who had 37 years more experience at this than he did. Then June's cardiologist found something on a scan that shouldn't have been there. The diagnosis came in September. An aggressive arrhythmia compounded by early valve deterioration. Not immediately life-threatening, her cardiologist said, but requiring management and monitoring for the foreseeable future. June absorbed this information in the same manner she absorbed all information, without theatrics, with a series of follow-up questions, and with the immediate instinct to move up the timeline. She spent the following 3 months finalizing every document. One afternoon in late November, she and Eleanor sat across from Robert Tran in his Guelph office for 4 hours and reviewed everything. At the end of the meeting, June signed the final transfer documents. She turned to Eleanor. She said only, "He'll come for it at the party. When he does, the door will already be locked. Let him knock." Eleanor drove home in the dark. The highway was wet. She turned off the radio and drove in silence and thought about her mother's hands on the documents and the way June had pressed her pen down with the same deliberate, settled firmness she pressed down on everything she meant to last. Chapter 5. The retirement party. The party was held on a Saturday, in late June, in the garden of the Hartwell house in Guelph. June had fought the idea of a party for 3 months, and then conceded to Eleanor's quiet persistence, which was how most things between them were decided. 60 people attended. Former clients, longtime colleagues, the firm's senior staff, a few family friends who had known June long enough to understand that the absence of ostentation at this event was itself the tribute. The garden was simple. White lights strung between the birch trees, a caterer from Elora, good wine from the Niagara Peninsula. June wore a navy blazer. She shook hands and accepted hugs and spoke warmly without performance, and she looked, Eleanor thought, like exactly what she was. A woman who had finished something real and knew it. Eleanor spent the first hour moving between guests, accepting condolences for the end of an era, correcting people gently when they used the word retirement, as though it were a kind of stopping. Her mother was not stopping. She was handing over. There was a difference. Adrian arrived 40 minutes into the party. He had driven up from Hamilton alone, which was what Eleanor expected. What she did not expect was that he would not be alone for long. Simone Aubert arrived 20 minutes after him in a dress that was appropriate for approximately every setting, except a retirement garden party. For a 63-year-old woman, her partner was supposed to have left behind. She carried a small clutch. She smiled at her face. She had never met with the ease of someone who had been briefed on the situation and decided she was winning it. Adrian did not introduce her as a colleague this time. He introduced her as a friend who happened to be passing through Guelph, which was geographically implausible but offered with such practiced nonchalance that 2 people actually nodded. He placed his hand briefly at the small of her back when he thought no one was looking. Eleanor saw. She watched from across the garden with a glass of Riesling in her hand and felt something calibrate inside her. Not grief, something more like recognition, the recognition of watching a prediction arrive exactly as predicted, on exactly the schedule you'd been told to expect. She crossed the garden. She stopped in front of Adrian and Simone. She said, "I'm so glad you could make it." She looked at Simone. She extended her hand. "Welcome. Thank you for coming." Her voice was the voice she had been using for 8 years. Level, pleasant, impossible to read. She turned to the guests beside them, without giving Adrian space for a response. She did not look at him again for the rest of the evening. Adrian interpreted this as obliviousness. He interpreted her composure as confirmation. He had always believed that Eleanor's equanimity under pressure was a form of passivity, that her inability to make scenes meant she was incapable of strategy. He had, as her mother had predicted, made the one mistake that undoes everything. He had underestimated the quiet one. Chapter 6. The acceleration in the weeks after the party. Adrian Voss did what June and Robert had said he would do. He accelerated. He began staying at Simone's condo in Toronto, 3 and 4 nights a week. He stopped attending the small rituals of the household without comment or explanation. The Sunday farmers market, the standing dinner with Eleanor's colleague, and her husband on the last Friday of each month. He began leaving work items on the kitchen table like small territorial markers, as though establishing a claim even as he was withdrawing from the premises. Then he called a lawyer. His lawyer was a family law specialist in Hamilton named Garrett Peel, who had a good reputation and a middling understanding of what he was about to walk into. Adrian told Garrett that the marriage was over and that he wanted to move efficiently toward a settlement. He described their assets as modest. He described Eleanor's family business as something she might be inheriting a share of eventually. He mentioned that her mother's health situation made a near-term transfer of assets likely. What he did not mention was that he had, 6 weeks earlier, transferred $47,000 from their joint savings account into a personal account he'd opened at a different institution without telling Eleanor. What he did not know was that Robert Tran's office had been alerted to the transfer within 36 hours. Eleanor received an encrypted email from Robert on a Monday morning with 3 attachments and a single line of text. He moved the money. "We are ready." She sat at her kitchen table with her coffee. She looked out the window at the backyard. The birch tree she'd planted the year they moved in was tall enough now to shade the corner of the fence. She thought about the file she'd been keeping, 2 years of receipts, screenshots, timestamps, the message about the word patient. She thought about her mother sitting across from Robert Tran, with her pen pressed down firmly on the transfer documents. She called Robert. She said, "Schedule the meeting." Chapter 7. The conference room the meeting took place on a Thursday morning in August. Robert Tran's offices occupied the 2nd floor of a converted heritage building on Wyndham Street, in Guelph, stone exterior, tall windows, the kind of space that had the confidence of something that had been standing for 100 years and intended to stand for 100 more. Adrian arrived with Garrett Peel 11 minutes early. He wore a charcoal suit and the expression of a man who believed he was the most prepared person in the building. He had been assured by Garrett that this would be a straightforward preliminary meeting. He had been advised to be reasonable, which he interpreted as meaning he had already won. Eleanor arrived on time. She wore a cream blouse and dark trousers and the pearl earrings her mother had given her. She carried nothing except a slim leather folder. She looked to Adrian, exactly as she always had, contained, unremarkable, manageable. Robert Tran came in behind her. He was in his late 50s, wore an unremarkable brown blazer, and had the unhurried calm of a man who had never once needed to perform authority because he had never once needed to establish it. Garrett Peel opened the proceedings. He outlined Adrian's position. The marriage had broken down. His client sought equitable division of marital assets. He listed the joint account, the RRSP accounts, the family home. He paused meaningfully before adding, "and any interest in the Hartwell family estate, including assets transferred to Eleanor Hartwell during the course of the marriage, which, under Ontario family law, may be considered in calculating the equalization payment." He said it as though it were the hinge, the thing the whole meeting swung on. Robert Tran nodded once. He opened the slim file in front of him and removed 3 documents. He placed them in a row on the table with the unhurried precision of a man who had been waiting very patiently to do exactly this. The first document. The family home at 114 Alderton Crescent, Guelph. Mr. Voss believes this property is jointly owned. The deed is held in the name of the Hartwell Family Trust, established in 2016, 7 months before the marriage. Mr. Voss's name has never appeared on the title or the mortgage instrument. He has occupied this property as a spouse but holds no legal interest in it. Garrett Peel stopped writing. The second document, a transfer of $47,000 from the joint Royal Bank savings account to a personal account in Mr. Voss's name at TD Canada Trust, made on July 9th without Mrs. Hartwell's knowledge or consent. This transfer occurred after Mr. Voss had already consulted with family law counsel, which we have confirmed through documentary evidence establishing deliberate intent to relocate assets in anticipation of proceedings. Under the Family Law Act of Ontario, this constitutes dissipation of net family property. We are prepared to file an application for an equalization adjustment accordingly. The room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something irrevocable has just been said. Robert placed the third document on the table. He looked at Adrian directly, regarding the Hartwell estate. Mr. Voss appears to have assumed that assets from the Hartwell Remediation Group, or any subsequent transfer from June Hartwell to Eleanor Hartwell, constitute property subject to equalization under Ontario family law. I need to clarify the correct position. Inheritances and gifts from third parties received during a marriage, and property held in trust prior to the marriage, are excluded from the definition of net family property under Section 4 of the Family Law Act, provided they have not been commingled with marital assets. The Hartwell Trust, established before the marriage and maintained in instruments entirely separate from any joint or marital account, is excluded. In its entirety, he paused. The trust, as of the date of transfer, holds assets valued at approximately $220 million. The number arrived in the room like a change in air pressure. Garrett Peel set his pen down. He looked at it. He looked at his client. Adrian was looking at Eleanor. His face had gone through several things in the space of 4 seconds. Confusion first, then the particular blankness of a man recalculating from the ground up, and then something that was not quite disbelief, because it was happening too clearly in front of him to be disbelieved. He looked like someone who had been shown an X-ray of a building he thought he owned and discovered the foundation was not attached to anything he recognized. 200. He started. He stopped. Robert continued, his voice carrying the same steady, unaffected evenness it had maintained throughout. Furthermore, given the documented transfer of funds, the undisclosed legal consultations conducted while the marriage was ongoing, and the pattern of financial conduct we have assembled, Mrs. Hartwell's position in any equalization proceeding is significantly strengthened. Mr. Voss's exposure on the dissipation claim, inclusive of penalties, exceeds $120,000. His own counsel will advise him on what that means for his negotiating position. Garrett turned to his client. His expression was the expression of a lawyer who has just understood exactly how thoroughly his client had misrepresented the situation to him. Dominic, he started, then stopped. He had used the wrong name, he corrected himself. Adrian, we should step out. Adrian did not move. He was looking at Eleanor. His eyes were scanning her face with the expression of a man trying to find a version of the situation that was more manageable than the one in front of him. You knew, he said. His voice was lower than usual. You knew the whole time. Eleanor looked at him for a moment before she answered. When she spoke, her voice was the voice she had been using in this marriage for 8 years. Quiet and unhurried and entirely without performance. I knew about Simone, she said. I knew about the account. I knew about the call you made to Garrett Peel's office in June. I knew that you had been asking my mother's bookkeeper indirect questions about the firm's valuation. I knew all of it, Adrian. I knew it while I was booking your dentist appointments and paying the Enbridge bill and managing every single thing you consumed, without once asking where it came from. She paused. My mother knew before I did, and while you were being patient, she was making sure that by the time you finally decided to make your move, there was nothing left to move on. You brought Simone to her retirement party. You stood in my mother's garden with your hand on another woman's back and smiled at her guests. And you looked at me, and you thought you were watching someone who didn't understand what was happening. Eleanor stood. She picked up the leather folder. You were watching someone who had already finished. She walked to the door. Robert gathered the documents with the unhurried efficiency of a man for whom this outcome was not a surprise. At the threshold, Eleanor paused. She did not turn. The joint accounts will be frozen pending the dissipation claim. Your personal items at Alderton Crescent will be available for collection on Saturday between 9 and noon. Please provide Robert's office with an address for delivery if you prefer. She opened the door and walked out. The door closed on its own, slowly the way well-fitted doors in old stone buildings close, without drama, without finality, just the quiet authority of something that has always fit exactly where it belongs. Chapter 8. The dismantling Adrian Voss's life unwound in the way that lives built on projected foundations unwind. Not dramatically, systematically. Week 1. The house at Alderton Crescent. He arrived Saturday morning with Simone's car and 3 boxes. Eleanor had left the key with a note on the porch that said simply, "Items are in the front bedroom. The movers have been called for 2. Please leave your key on the counter when you're done." There was no drama in the note. There was nothing for drama to push against. He collected his things and left the key on the counter and sat in the driveway for a while, and then drove to Simone's condo in Toronto. Week 2. His employer, a mid-sized commercial development firm in Hamilton, conducted a disclosure review after he submitted paperwork listing the dissipation claim as pending legal action. The conversation with his director lasted 11 minutes. He was placed on administrative leave, which in the specific culture of that office meant he was not returning. Week 3. The personal account at TD Canada Trust, into which he had transferred $47,000, was flagged under the restraining order that Robert's office had applied for. The funds were frozen. His credit cards, which he had been using with the casual confidence of a man who believed a large inheritance was 3 to 6 months away, reached their limits faster than he expected. Week 4. Simone Aubert was 31 years old sharp and had spent 2 months calculating the trajectory of a man who had described himself as being on the verge of a significant financial position. The condo was hers. The income was hers. The furniture was hers. The life she had been living for the past 8 months had depended on Adrian being what he said he was. A man with access to something substantial. A man with patience and a plan and a wife who would sign whatever was put in front of her. He was not that man. He was a man on administrative leave living on her couch with frozen assets, a dissipation claim, and a resume that needed revision. She told him on a Wednesday. She was kind about it, which was somehow worse than if she hadn't been. She said she thought they'd wanted different things, and that she hoped he'd be okay, and that she thought he should probably make arrangements for somewhere else to stay by the end of the month. He sat in the underground parking garage of her building for 45 minutes. He had no house, no income, no marriage, no mistress, no access to the money he'd moved, no professional standing to trade on. Every structure he had been standing on for 8 years had been removed, and beneath those structures was something he had never bothered to develop, because he had never believed he would need it. There had always been someone else managing the foundation. There had always been Eleanor, and Eleanor had stopped. Chapter 9. The photograph. 9 months after the divorce finalized, Eleanor Hartwell was photographed at a community housing summit in Hamilton, an event she had organized through the Hartwell Foundation's newly launched Affordable Housing Initiative, which she had funded personally with a commitment of $22 million over 4 years. The photograph appeared in the Hamilton Spectator and was picked up by a Toronto news outlet the following week. It was not a glamorous photograph. Eleanor was standing at a whiteboard in the Foundation's meeting room, mid-sentence, pointing at a set of figures. She was wearing a gray blazer and the pearl earrings. She looked like what she was, a woman in the middle of a great deal of purposeful work. The caption read, "Eleanor Hartwell, daughter of Hartwell Remediation Group founder June Hartwell, is leading the Family Foundation's expansion into housing stability programming." Adrian saw it on his phone on a Thursday afternoon. He was in a coffee shop on King Street West in Hamilton, waiting for a call from a headhunter about a project coordination role at a small construction firm in Burlington. He was wearing the charcoal suit, which needed dry cleaning. His briefcase contained a resume he had rewritten 4 times. He looked at the photograph for a long time. He thought about the woman he had married, the one who packed his lunch and renewed the home insurance and never once raised her voice. The one he had dismissed as easy, the one he had been patient about, the word he had actually written in a message he had not known anyone would ever see. He thought about the garden party in June. Simone beside him, his hand at the small of her back, Eleanor, across the grass, with a glass of Riesling, looking at him with an expression he had interpreted as confusion. He understood now, sitting in the coffee shop, with his unremarkable resume and his cold coffee, that it had not been confusion. It had been the expression of a woman watching something she had long anticipated arrive exactly on schedule. He had walked into her mother's garden believing he was the one with the plan. He had been the plan. The call from the headhunter came through. He answered it. The role was 40% less than what he'd been earning. He said yes without negotiating, because he no longer had the position to negotiate from, because the position had always been borrowed from someone else, and she had taken it back. Chapter 10. The Birch Tree. 11 months after the divorce, Eleanor sat on the back porch of the house in Guelph on a Saturday morning in May. The birch tree had fully leafed out. The garden had the particular luminous quality of a Canadian spring that has waited long enough to arrive, and intends to make the most of it. The air smelled like cut grass and cold, clean water. Her phone was on the table beside her coffee. On the phone was the encrypted folder she had maintained for 2 years. Every restaurant charge, every hotel receipt, the screenshot from the mutual acquaintance, the messages from Robert, the documentation assembled with the same careful, patient attention she had brought to everything in her life that actually mattered. She opened the folder. She scrolled through it once, slowly, the way you walk the perimeter of a space before you leave it. Not because anything remains, because the practice of confirming that nothing remains is itself a form of closing. Then she selected the folder and deleted it. The phone asked her to confirm. She confirmed. The screen cleared. She had not forgiven Adrian. That was not what the deletion was. Forgiveness implied that what he had done was the kind of thing that needed forgiving, and she had decided some weeks ago that it wasn't. It was simply information she had received, processed, and acted upon. The file had done its work. The work was complete. Carrying the file past the point of its usefulness would mean carrying him past the point of his relevance. She set the phone face down on the table. She picked up her coffee. She listened to the birds in the birch tree. She thought about her mother. June was doing well. The arrhythmia was managed. She had spent the winter gardening and reading and making calls to the Hartwell Foundation board, with the same methodical attention she had brought to everything for 37 years. Except now the attention was unhurried, in a way it had never been able to be. Eleanor thought about her mother's instruction. A man who never asks what you carry will always assume he can take it when he needs it. She had carried a great deal. She had carried it without announcement, without acknowledgement, without any of the infrastructure of recognition that might have made it visible. She had been mistaken for her own quietness. Mistaken for the furniture of a life she was, in fact, building from underneath. Her mother had not said, "Leave." Her mother had not said, "Fight." Her mother had said, "Make sure there is nothing for him to take." And Eleanor had done that, not out of revenge, out of something more practical and more durable, out of the understanding that the most powerful thing a woman can do, in certain rooms with certain men, is finish what she started before they understand the game has started. She finished her coffee. The morning opened up around her, wide and unhurried, the birch leaves turning in a light wind off the escarpment. She thought about what came next. There was the housing summit follow-up in August. There was the foundation board meeting in September. There was a site assessment she was consulting on in Sudbury. Contaminated land, the kind of slow, unglamorous, permanent work she had grown up watching her mother do and had understood, too late to be anything other than grateful, was the most sustaining kind. There were calls she wanted to make. There were things she wanted to build. She had time. She had resources. She had a name that meant something in this province, not because it was famous, but because it was backed by 37 years of work that had made things better, quieter, cleaner, more livable for people who had never known the Hartwell name and never needed to. She stood. She picked up her mug. She went inside. The birch tree moved in the wind. The morning continued without her having to do anything to earn it. The women who manage everything in silence are not invisible because they are small. They are invisible because they are doing the kind of work that holds everything else up, and the world, being what it is, rarely looks down at its own foundations until the day they are no longer there, and by then, the woman who built them has already moved on to something better. Welcome to Fierce Queen's Reckoning. New stories arrive every week for the ones who build carefully, protect fiercely, and leave only when they're ready. The next one is already waiting.